I love a great story, whether it be in a movie, whether it be in a book, whether it be in a TV show. I love a great story, from a musical to a play. I love when people tell me stories because I get infatuated with that story. I feel like I'm a part of it if it's a good story. A few years ago, I had a chance to write a book, and it was my story, and I wrote it, and there were things in there that brought me to tears. There were things in it that made me smile, but it was my story. And until my editor got involved, and the editor was like, you need to take this out because it's a little redundant, or go deeper in this emotion because it's great, and you need to go deeper. What the editor was trying to do was taking control of my story to make it better. But I felt like I was losing control of my story. I believe most of us would feel that we are in control of our own lives, that we're in control of our story. We're the author of our story, that I am in control of the story of me until Jesus gets involved. When Jesus steps in, He doesn't step in to be just a chapter in our life. This is chapter 12, when I gave my life to Christ. That's not what Jesus wants. He comes to interrupt our story. He comes to take over our story. He comes to make it better. In Mark chapter 5, there was a man by the name of Jairus who had a storybook life. He was a respected man in the community. He was the synagogue ruler, which means he was in charge of the entire synagogue except for the teaching and the worship. So he was kind of like the president of the synagogue. We know he had a wife, and we know he had a little girl. She was about 12 years old. So his life was going great until his story gets interrupted when his little girl gets sick. Every day she got sicker and sicker and sicker. Now get inside the mind of this father. He couldn't do anything to help her. All the doctors were there, and the doctor said, Jairus, she's going to die unless something happens. And now this dad begins to panic, and he hears about this man named Jesus that's coming into town. He is going to be on shore in just a few minutes. And Jairus has heard about Jesus before. Since he was a synagogue ruler, he had heard the stories of Jesus coming and to the synagogues, and it brings a big crowd. And big crowds for synagogue leaders means big problems, big cleanups. Or maybe Jairus has been in the crowd before, and he's either seen Jesus perform miracles and heal the sick, or he's heard of Jesus healing the sick by just placing his hands on him. And so what Jairus did, he goes, you know what? I can go ask Jesus right now just to come place his hands on my little girl, and my little girl will be healed. She'll be fine, and she can live all the rest of her life. So Jesus was Jairus' last shot to heal his little girl, or his little girl is going to die. So Jairus goes to the shore to meet Jesus, and he goes and he falls at this man's feet, and he says this, my little girl is dying. Please come put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live. So Jesus went with him. The only thing recorded here is the action of Jesus. It doesn't say anything about what Jesus said to Jairus or anything like that. It just said that he went with him. So Jairus is probably thinking, whew, this man who can heal the sick is coming and walking my direction right now. He's coming to heal my little girl. So I'm going to be okay. So Jairus is saying, chapter 13, my walk with Jesus. And so he's thinking everything is good until his plan gets interrupted. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and spent all that she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought, if I just touch his clothes, I will be healed. Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once, Jesus realized that power had gone from him, and he turned around in the crowd and asked, who touched my clothes? We all had that professor in college or that teacher in high school that we knew that if we brought up one certain subject, they would go on a tangent and it would waste the entire class period. Well, that's kind of what Jesus does right here. He doesn't do what Jairus was wanting. Jairus wanted to go to the shore, to his house, and get his little girl healed. But Jesus stops and he does something that Jairus wasn't planning. He talks to this lady. Let's quickly focus on the woman for a second. She had been bleeding for 12 years. So that means she had had her period for 12 years. And in those times, she could not, during her period, could not go into the synagogue to worship. She couldn't touch anyone physically, whether it be a handshake or a hug. She couldn't touch anyone. So this caused relationships to be almost impossible. With no physical touch, you can't have a relationship. And so this woman went for 12 years alone. And God said in Genesis that it is not good for man to be alone. And she was alone for 12 years. Then the woman, knowing what happened to her, came and fell at his feet, trembling with fear, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." In one touch, her life was restored, because in Hebrews chapter 4, verse 15, it says, we have a high priest that can be touched. As great of a moment as this is, let's get inside of Jairus' mind for a minute. His little girl is dying. At any moment she could die, and Jesus is stopping to talk to this lady. Why are you stopping, Jesus? My little girl is dying. Let's go, let's go, let's go. And a lot of times when God doesn't answer the way we want Him to do, we get mad at Him. And we get mad at God for not answering the way we want Him to answer. God, why are my bills piling up? Why can't I get a job? Why is my husband leaving me? Why has my wife left me? Why am I going through my issue? But walking with God is not always about the destination. It is about the lessons that you learn along the way. Could Jesus have healed that little girl at the seashore and just told Jairus, your daughter's healed? Yes. Could Jesus have stopped the woman with the issue of blood mid-story and say, you know what? I've got an appointment I've got to be at, but I know your story. I love you. Thank you so much for stopping me, but I got to go. If I'm late, she's not going to be healed. No, Jesus didn't do that. But you know why? Because that woman mattered to Him. Her story mattered because He was writing her story. She hit rock bottom, and Jairus hits rock bottom right now. While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter is dead, they said. Right here, his dream was interrupted. He loved his little girl. He went and begged for her life for Jesus. And now he was never going to see her graduate from high school, to get married, to give him a grandchild. He was never seeing that. His daughter is dead. That's it. No coming back from that. I think right here, Jairus lost hope. Why bother the teacher anymore? I think this was a direct shot at Jesus, because now they're saying, He's not who you thought He was, Jairus. He's not who you thought He was. But Jesus, overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, and these are the only recorded words that Jesus says to Jairus, don't be afraid, just believe. It's going to be fine, Jairus. But in Jairus' mind, it's like, really? Jesus, she's dead. There's no coming back from dead. You just heard what they said. She's dead. But faith starts at the end of human limitations. When you hit rock bottom in your life, you are just where God wants you to be, because He's saying to you, don't be afraid, just believe. When you can't pay those bills, don't be afraid, just believe. When you can't find a job, don't be afraid, just believe. When my life is falling apart, don't be afraid, just believe. And Jesus is asking, do you trust me? He didn't let anyone follow Him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. And after they threw him all out. This is the same phrasing in John chapter 2 when Jesus cleared out the temple. So Jesus literally is right now grabbing people and throwing them out of the window. And Jairus is like, Jesus, what are you doing? Why are you cleaning this out? So sometimes maybe Jesus has to clean out the house before He can work in your life. He took the child's mother and father and the disciples who were with Him, and He went into where the child was. Jairus walks into the room and for the first time sees his little girl dead, lifeless. Imagine being in his place or being in his wife's place. I imagine him falling to the floor and sobbing uncontrollably. And his wife may be trying to console him, or maybe she falls on the floor and cries with him. And this is not recorded, this is just me. But I wonder if Jesus got in between both parents. And He puts His hands on their shoulders, and He says, don't be afraid, just believe. Don't be afraid, just believe. Do you trust me? Because when your life is at rock bottom, Jesus is whispering in your ear, don't be afraid, just believe. When your story's been interrupted with trials in your life, don't be afraid, just believe. And Jesus is asking, do you trust him? Do you trust him? And he took the little girl by the hand and said to her, Talitha kum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. And immediately the little girl stood up. I wonder why Jesus didn't heal her back at the seashore. Maybe it was because Jesus had something greater in mind. Which is greater, to heal a little girl from an illness or to raise her from the dead? So maybe in your life, whatever is going through right now, maybe the reason Jesus isn't answering how you want him to answer is because he's got something greater in store for you. He's got a bigger plan. You see, this wasn't just a little chapter in Jairus' life. Chapter 13, my walk with Jesus. That wasn't it. What Jesus had in mind changed the rest of Jairus' life. When Jairus saw his little girl graduate from high school, it was because Jesus did that. When he walked her down the aisle, he looked back and he says, Jesus did that. Jesus is doing this. When she handed him his first grandchild from her, he thought, Jesus made this happen. Jesus made this happen. It's not just a chapter. Jesus took over his entire life. And Jairus' journey with Jesus is symbolic to our journey with Jesus. That's full of interruption. But Jesus is whispering the entire time, do you trust me? When your story is interrupted, do you trust me? When your plans have been interrupted, do you trust me? And when your dreams have been shattered, don't be afraid. Just believe. Do you trust me? Will you allow God to continue to write your story?